Jack Endino here, Seattle-based studio rat, record producer, engineer, guitar player, ex-drummer, uh, and general all-around noise monger.
So my first question here is, how would you describe yourself as a producer versus as a musician?
Well, that's interesting because I started as a musician and as a producer at the same time. In other words, from the first moment that I was playing an instrument and learning how to play an instrument, I always had a microphone and something recording. In those days, it was just a cassette deck. Um, but the tape was always rolling right from the first moments that I started daring to think that perhaps I could learn how to play an instrument. My thinking was, if you didn't have it on tape, you had no proof that anything had happened. Um, and so I could play the tapes back and convince myself that maybe I was actually learning how to play my instrument. And it seems to have worked eventually. Um, so I was always comfortable with the red light being on. And even the very first bands I was in, um, my friends who I was playing with, who are, people are very skittish about recording when they're not used to the idea and they get really self-conscious. But I sort of, got all my friends used to it early on because I was always recording. Um, but so differences between myself as a musician and a producer, I don't know. It's kind of one continuum for me because um, I view production as, I'm looking at what they're doing from the standpoint of, I know how to do it myself. I see what you're doing with that guitar, and I can tell that that G string is a little bit out of tune and that your amplifier needs a little bit of a biasing job, and that maybe that speaker that I've put the microphone in front of is the one that has a tear in it, and I need to move it. Um, because I've had to deal with all that stuff myself as a guitar player, likewise as a drummer, because I actually started as a drummer. So it all ties together really. Um, just knowing the tools that my clients are using, knowing those tools intimately myself helps a great deal in problem solving and in just keeping the session going and keeping those sort of impediments out of their creative way.
And you called yourself an ex-drummer. Why would you describe yourself as that?
Well, because I started as a drummer, that was my first instrument that I dared to play with other humans. And eventually uh, just due to the way things work in a band scenario, you wind up playing other people's songs if you're a drummer most of the time. So being an aspiring songwriter, I had to switch to bass and finally guitar. Um, I think I still play guitar like a bass player sometimes, but I think I'm the only one who knows that. Uh, but the thing is, I drummed in bands back in the late 80s. I was in a surf band called the Crypt Kicker Five at the same time that I was playing guitar in Skinyard. And it was two completely different audiences. It was the most ungrunge band, most non-grunge band you could possibly have in Seattle at the time. And we had a great time doing it. And then when the whole sort of grunge thing kind of fizzled, and the world made clear to me that it wanted me to be a record producer more than a musician, I spent the 90s traveling to foreign countries, and just whenever, someone in Chile or Portugal or Denmark or wherever would get a hold of me and say, hey, come and record a record for us, off I would go. So for much of the 90s, I wasn't playing as much music. I thought I would see where this record production thing was going to take me. And I figured, well, okay, I got that music thing out of my system now. Well, that wasn't the case. So, by 1995, I was, playing again. And in the 2000s, I ended up playing in multiple bands again. And sometime around 2005, I started playing drums again. And I did that for a couple of years in a band while I was playing guitar in another band. It was the same scenario. I just can't have enough music in my life. But I started having tendonitis issues, and I realized that, not drumming for 15 years was maybe a mistake. Um, and of course, I'm not in my 20s anymore, and the old tendons and joints don't work quite the same way. So I decided it was obvious that I needed to stop playing drums in a band, or I was going to start hurting myself. Um, but I still do occasionally. I'll throw a drum loop down on something that I'm working on, or occasionally play something. Like my wife and I have musical projects. We had a band called MKB Ultra, actually, which is sort of on ice right now because of COVID. And we like to write songs together. So I'll play the drums just to, give her something to interact with while she's working it out on the guitar. But my days as a professional drummer, I think, are more or less over with. At least I hope so. So that's why I said ex drummer. See, too much information.
Well, you mentioned COVID there. How has COVID impacted things for you, especially working on this album that you just released?
The album that I just released, it's called Set Myself on Fire. Well, I make a solo record. Of course, I had a band called Skin Yard back in the 80s. We made 5 albums. And we had a pretty good run. We got to go to Europe. We toured the US a few times. We were on a label that was part of SST, which was a pretty big indie label in those days. Um, and then I've made solo records ever since then. And this one here, Set Myself on Fire, is my 4th solo record. But it took me almost 15 years to make it. And my record before that, which is called Permanent Fatal Error, it came out in 2006. That record took me 13 years to make. And the reason is I spend so much time making records for other people and
Mhm.
playing in bands with other people that my solo projects and just take a back burner. And but I'm always recording. If I have good people around me, there's some who are interesting, and I have some songs written, I'll grab them and go into the studio and record a few songs, and that goes on the back burner. And then after a few years, I'll go and look at the list and see, well, do I have enough songs to maybe pull a record together? And then I'll start, okay, time to finalize the lyrics and everything. So I'm always working on stuff, but um, I don't even remember what your question was, but basically the records are finished when they're finished. When we're finished, and COVID gave me a chance to finish it because, all my live projects were on ice last year.
Mhm.
I finished 4 records. I'm in sort of in 4 bands right now, which is sort of typical. I finished my solo record. I finished 2 records during, well, no, I finished a record during COVID for this other band I'm in, which is called Sky Cries Mary. This is just coming out. And this was made, um, all of us, we have not even been in the same room together since February of 2020. So we started sending files to each other. And somehow, me being the studio rat, I managed to pull an album together out of it. And it's pretty interesting because everybody has home studios. Um, so we sort of just, forged onward. So that's another way of just of doing things. Most of my solo record was recorded over the past decade. In fact, the
Mhm.
oldest song on it is from 1995. Um, and most of it was recorded after 2010. Um, Sometimes it just takes me a couple of decades to finish a song, or it just takes a couple of albums before I have the right group of songs to fit some oddball song in. It just wouldn't fit on the other records. It was too weird. And now it makes sense on this record. So, whatever. Let me think. Another band that I'm in is called Purple Strange. This is another record that I have. This was another product of the lockdown. The band is called Purple Strange, and I have here, um, on the back here is Ron. Ron Nine is how he's known. He's the guitar player from Love Battery. And so that's really interesting, playing guitar with somebody who's probably way better than I am, um, in the band. So we made a CD. And of course, the CD came out in the middle of the pandemic. So we're all sort of wondering what we're going to do with it. And then I have a psych band called Beyond Captain Orca. Um,
Wow.
and this is an improvisational power trio. No vocals, no songs, no rehearsals, no overhead. It's a fun band. Guitar, bass, drums. We just get up, we plug in all our pedals, and we just go and make sound. And people are certain that we've written songs when we actually haven't. So we record them all multi-track and put them all up on a Bandcamp site, Beyond Captain Orca, bandcamp.com. So that's like a completely different concept of having a band. Um, and so that's kind of fun. So we've managed to do a few shows that were strictly online, basically playing for an empty room and some cameras, because there was a lot of that going on over the last year and a half, and we got to do some of it too. So you sort of, what do they say? You know, you if you get lemons, you got to make lemonade. So
Yeah.
we sort of I've managed to keep making music one way or another. As far as the studio part of my life goes, there's been more mixing and mastering for the last year and a half, and I was already sort of transitioning into that anyway, because I'm taking mastering pretty seriously now. I'm doing a lot of it, um, but there were not as many live in-person sessions in the studio that I worked out of because people were, logically enough trying to isolate, but I had a
Mhm.
few bands who were like, hey, we all live in the same house, but you got to be careful and you got to take it, you got to be careful in the studio. That's about it. um so I haven't been doing as many sessions. um People just send me files, and I'm not even sure where a lot of them are from. you know, I get random emails from all over the world, really, with people going, hey, will you mix a couple songs for us? And I get the Pro Tools sessions and we proceed to, work over the internet. Um, so the work goes on, and I'm almost as busy as I've ever been. But the nature of the work has changed. It's not so much in person as it was, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Mhm. I think that's the perfect transition into talking about Set Myself on Fire. I first want to start with the title. I love this title because it can have so many different meanings, which makes me think and want to listen to the piece as a whole. And I know it's one of the tracks too. So like what made you choose that song to be the title of this album?
Well, I actually had the song already. And I don't know why. It just made sense to me, because this is the funny thing. The album makes more sense now lyrically in the title and some of the lyrics. It seems rather timely with what's going on, but I wrote most of the lyrics over the last decade.
Mhm.
I think the newest song on there is probably "Been Here Before," which is probably the lyric that means the least literally. It's just a vague sort of lyric, actually, that seemed to make the song work for me. Some of them are kind of personal to me. Um, I've spent a lot of time thinking about mortality over the last couple of years, but I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of decades thinking about mortality because I've had a lot of friends, just sort of drop away.
Yeah.
Um, you go to enough funerals and you start to think like, well, I could be next. Let's make every day count. And that's going to affect your music and your lyrics a little bit. In Seattle, there's been, a number of fairly well-known tragedies
Mhm.
in the Seattle music scene, for various reasons, depression, drugs, whatever it is. So I already had reasons to be concerned and to sort of consider myself lucky that I'm still here when, as I say in one of my songs, a lot of my friends are not.
Yeah.
Um, and then COVID happens, and I'm thinking, wow, was I like seeing into the future here or what? I don't know.
Mhm.
It's just accidental, really. But the record is concerned with, musings on mortality and
Mhm.
wanting to make the best of what time you have left. Um, because we're all going to go eventually.
Yeah.
So here it is.
Yeah.
Make what you will of it.
Are you yourself afraid of death? And if so, how did that impact this album?
I don't think so. When it comes for you, it comes for you.
Mhm.
Really, if you've lived a good life, um, it's, I'll tell you who had a good attitude was my dad. When my dad passed away, he was 84. He was pretty sick, and he said to me, "You know what? I got my money's worth. I had a good life. It was fine." He was ready to go. He sort of said, it's been all right. It's been a good ride. And I kind of thought, wow, that's a pretty good way to look at it. You got to make the best of it. And in my case, I got to bring as much music into existence as I can, whether it's my own or other people's.
Hmm. And well, you worked on this for more than 10 years. So, how did this album change over the many years that you worked on it?
You know what? It did change. There's a story there because I thought the record was finished in 2012, and I had a whole bunch of songs. There were some leftovers from my last record, Permanent Fatal Error, and some new songs that I recorded with drummer Barrett Martin, who's also a record producer now. He was the drummer in on the last two Skin Yard records back in the late '80s, early '90s,
Hmm.
and that's how long I've known Barrett. And he ended up joining the Screaming Trees and Mad Season, and he's made lots of solo records, and he does a lot of production now. He's a wonderful drummer, and he's one of those people that I call when I have some songs that nobody else can play.
Yeah.
So I did some recording with him in 2010, and I had some older songs I'd recorded with him, and I put a record together, and there was a label called Finn Records that was going to release the album, and I had the title and everything. I had the title song, and the label went under, and which gave me a chance to get a new band together, which became known as Endino's Earthworm, and wrote more songs, recorded more songs, and pretty soon, uh, you know, it was a case of throwing out some of the lesser ones and putting in some newer ones. And I finally pulled a record together. As I said, during COVID, it was time to finally like sift through it and pick what was going to make the record and what wasn't. So yeah, it almost came out in a completely different form. There would have been maybe half the songs would have been the same, and everything else that's on there is either newer or older.
Well, how do you arrange the order of an album and what in general goes into the arranging the order of one?
This is a strange question, and a lot of my clients ask me the same question because they say, "Hey, help us. What do you think should be the first song, and what should be the second song?" And that's a tough thing because this is the problem. People don't listen to albums as a unit quite so much anymore the way they used to. When all we had was physical media that would play linearly,
Yeah.
an LP or a cassette,
Hmm.
you had to think about the song order, the order in which people would be hearing the songs. So you'd want to sort of, the idea was you'd make some sort of a sonic journey for them to take as they go from the first song to the last song of the record. Um, and I don't think most people listen to music that way anymore. Um, they're doing it with playlists or they're putting it on shuffle. That started with iPods, but um, I don't know if the sequencing is quite as important, except that people do make a decision on whether they're going to give some time to a record based on just the first few seconds of the first few songs. All they have to hear is like, you know, 10 seconds of a song to know whether or not they're going to want to listen to it. So, how did I sequence it? You know what? It's easy to do in Pro Tools or any computer system because you can just string them on a timeline and just shuffle the songs around literally and just see which one goes into which one. You want to think you don't want too many songs in the same key back to back. You
Hmm.
don't want too many songs the same tempo back to back. You want to have it, you don't want people to get tired of it by hearing the samey sort of like put three punk rock songs in a row and then
Yeah.
like two long slow songs. No, you got to mix it up, so that people will want to um, listen to it continuously. Now I managed to fit the CD is 15 songs and
Yeah.
vinyl is 14, and it's the extra song is only a minute and a half. But strangely enough, I wrote a lot of short songs, which is a little out of character for me. People associate me with Skinyard, which was a little bit proggy, but I like a good snappy pop tune with, don't bore us, get to the chorus,
Yeah.
throw in a bridge, make sure there's some hooks. If there's a solo, keep it short.
Hmm.
Um, that's what I do in my own stuff. Other bands that I'm in, perhaps maybe not so much.
Did you have a bigger pool of songs? Like, were there ones you couldn't include on this one that you wanted to?
There's a few that would have been on the earlier version of the record that didn't come out that I'll probably, maybe release an EP or something in a year or something with some of those other songs. Maybe there's always a few things laying around. I don't let anything go to waste.
Hmm.
I'll either finish it and release it or record a better version. or rewrite the lyrics or whatever it takes. You know what I mean? I don't, I don't have that many ideas that I can afford to let them go to waste. Really, just got to make sure
Hmm.
they're good. If they're bad, they're out the window. have pretty high standards for myself because figure this: I've recorded, produced, engineered, mixed, whatever, worked on probably well over 600 records right now for other people.
Hmm.
Um, so I set a pretty high bar for myself
Hmm.
um, because I've worked with some pretty great people, and I don't want to just make a record just because, oh yeah, it's an engineer's record. It's like, well, no, no, no. I'm comparing myself with the very best of the people that I've worked with. So I'm
Hmm.
pretty hard on myself creatively. This is the thing with um, trying to wear the producer hat and the musician hat at the same time. It's two different sides of your brain. Um, and it's difficult for me to do both at the same time. Engineering myself is kind of a nightmare because when I'm playing guitar, I don't want to think about this stuff.
Hmm.
I just want to play the music and let it flow out of me. But at the same time, the engineering part of me is going, wait a minute, you need to move that microphone a little farther from the speaker, or oh, that tone. So I tend to, I'm actually kind of worse at recording myself than I am at recording anybody else for that reason. Because the musician side of me gets really impatient with the engineering side. It's, it's good enough. Come on. And then later I have to use the engineering side of my brain to fix it. Um, so that is a challenge, and it takes time. That's another reason why it takes me so long to finish a record for myself when clients that I have will make an album with me in 3 or 4 days sometimes
Hmm.
um, because they know exactly what they're doing. And my job is clear, their job is clear, there's separation there, and everybody gets their part of the job done. Preparation is a big part of it too.
Is there a certain separation for you where like you can try and separate the two brains, or is it always a struggle?
It's always a struggle. It is always a struggle. I try to keep the engineering and the musician part separated in time. In other words, I'm either doing music or I'm doing engineering, and I'm not
Hmm.
trying to do them at the same time.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I've even had other people assist me when I'm recording my own stuff, and I seldom ever do that because I don't need that much help. But sometimes I need somebody else to just take care of that stuff. And yeah, so that's always the option there. I'm not afraid to have someone else engineer me, but I'm terrible at delegating. I'm really bad. Um, I'll think I'm letting them do it, but then I'll be like looking over their shoulder the whole time. It's a terrible thing.
Well, I write my own music, and one thing that I hate is when people ask me what my favorite song is because I feel like I've heard other performers say that like they love them all equally. But is there a certain song on this album that has extra meaning to you, or even lyrics that you think really capture you in this moment?
I think Shadow World is pretty. Shadow World was a song about. It's about what's on the other side,
Hmm.
basically. And I think I wrote that at a time when someone else I knew had crossed over into the other side. And what makes this more meaningful for me is that the drummer that I had in my band Earthworm, um, who plays on about half of this album, his name is Johnny Graziadei. He passed away earlier this year from stomach cancer, and so I kind of don't that band I don't have anymore. Um, but he got to hear the record before, I as the record was being sent to be made, I burned him a copy. He got to hear the finished version of it at least, and I was glad I could at least give him that. Um, but you know, and then there's been people dropping with strange heart attacks and so forth. Um, it's been a pretty weird couple of years. And the songs that mean something to me change over time. Here's the thing: someone asks you, "What's your favorite song?" Your favorite song is usually the most recent one that you wrote.
Hmm.
That's the one you're not sick of. So, I think "Wantonly," which is the opening song, is actually the oldest song on the record. I probably wrote that um, during the Skin Yard era, and I demoed it and never finished it. And pulled it out in 2010 and thought, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a song here. Um, but that was stuck in my head for probably a year. And that happens to my own stuff. It's maddening. My own songs get stuck in my head for months at a time. Um, but you know, there's other things. There's a song on here called Groovy Suction. It's literally a minute and a half instrumental, and it's a song that Skinyard used to play as an
Oh,
encore
really?
to get people to leave. You know, when our singer was tired, you know, we'd done our set and people wanted more, and our singer was like, you know, his voice was fried. Our Ben McMillan, the singer for Skinyard, who's also not with us anymore, he passed away in 2008. Um, Yet another missing friend. But he would say, you know, hey, I can't sing another song. And so we would play this little short instrumental and say, all right, that's all, folks. Good night. Thanks for coming to the show.
I heard you talking about finding your singing voice through confidence and feeling comfortable with your voice through this album. How did you find your voice and that confidence?
Um, by singing on stage as much as possible, because all the bands I've been in prior to about 2005, I was not the singer.
Mhm,
You know, I might maybe get a few words in somewhere on the recording, but um, we had Skinyard had a real lead singer, Ben McMillan, who's kind of a showman, and he was a bit of a ham, and he had a big, rich voice, and he wasn't encumbered with a guitar most of the time, so it freed him to sing across the rhythms and so forth, which is hard for me as a guitar player. I tend to have to be more, my singing tends to lock in with my picking hand a little bit rhythmically.
mhm,
Um, he didn't have that issue. Uh, so I never developed the confidence to be a singer until finally around 2005 when I thought I was going to, excuse me, 2012 when I thought I was going to have a solo record coming out. And I thought, time to get a band together. Um, and we started playing, and I started getting used to the idea of being a lead singer because I knew I could do it in the studio. It's
mhm,
like my recordings were good. I thought, well, my voice will do this. I just got to get used to looking up at the audience when I play my guitar. This is the thing. You can tell if you go to a show and the singer is playing guitar, he's looking at the guitar the whole time. It's kind of annoying. You know, I've seen this and I was that guy. So, you know, you have to get used to looking up, and you have to get used to singing over the easy parts of the song so that you don't have to look at the guitar.
mhm,
That's the secret there. Um, it sort of streamlines your songwriting to some extent to write songs that allow you to be able to sing them.
mhm.
So that was a good bit of learning that took me, you know, a couple of decades to finally figure out for myself. Um, but yeah, I had the Earthworm. I had another band called Candy Coded that we played for 3 or 4 years, and I sang like two songs in that band. We had another lead singer. His name was Jamie Lynn.
Mhm.
He's a well-known snowboarder from the old days. In fact, on the wall behind me here is a painting of his,
Oh,
um,
wow.
a Jamie Lynn original, actually. And we had a lot of fun in that band, and that got me used to singing on stage. And then when the Earthworm started, I just took the bull by the horns and eventually realized that I can actually do this. Um, but nothing like getting out in front of a room full of people, making yourself do it.
What is your process when it comes to writing songs?
I'm a riff guy. I will pick up a guitar and wait for an interesting guitar hook to fall out of my fingers, basically.
Mhm,
Um, and I try to make sure that I'm always near a tape recorder or a handheld recorder or something. Now I have my cell phone, so I don't lose any ideas
mhm,
because ideas used to come to me randomly. Like while I was driving, for instance, I'd come up with some amazing little guitar part and I'd be humming it over and over and over again. So
mhm.
I'd get home in time to record it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, something where the phone would ring or something, I'd run into somebody and then it's gone. You'll never, that idea is gone. I could never remember it again. So I always try and make sure there's recording apparatus near me whenever I pick up an instrument and think that I'm going to be in a songwriting kind of mood. And I'll record. I just would make cassettes in the old days of ideas. And then years later, I would go through them and comb through them and say, okay, there's one that's good. The rest of these are horrible. Um, so uh, that's for me, it starts on guitar usually. Sometimes it starts with a bass riff. Um,
Mhm.
some things I have actually been inspired by a particular drum beat because I'll be dallying and dallying on the drums, and I'll come up with some strange sort of pattern and I'll think, well, what guitar riff would go on this pattern? Um, so kind of depends on what instrument you have in your hands at the time. I'm not one of those people who writes the lyrics first.
Mhm. I've read where celebrated singers slash guitarists like John Fogerty and Bruce Springsteen and others say that they're always trying to get better at being a guitarist. And I think, how can you be better than that? Like that's where my brain goes. Do you find yourself as a master guitarist focusing on what you've mastered, or always building and looking for the next thing or technique?
You're being far too kind to call me a master guitarist because basically the thing that I'm very, very good at is playing Jack Endino style guitar. I'm not very diverse. Um, there's certain things that I'm good at. I'm a good rhythm guitar player actually, and my guitar has actually wound up on some other people's records here and there because people insist on me throwing a part down or maybe even a solo occasionally, which I do under much protest because it's really hard for me to be in the middle of engineering somebody's record and suddenly have to switch into player mode because I have no objectivity on my own playing. None. I'm producing them. I'm not producing me.
Mhm.
So that kind of makes me crazy, but sometimes it works out. Um, rhythm guitar is a little bit easier. It's either tight or it's not. The chords are correct or they aren't. Um, I don't have to be improvisational. It's more like, can I contribute to this in a positive way? So I'm a pretty good rhythm guitar player. Leads, everyone knows their own limitations, and I know what mine are. I know what I get away with as a player, and I know what not to try and get away with as a player. So that's part of being perceived as a good musician is, you know, you got to stretch, you got to try stuff, and you always know your limitations, which means you always know that you can get better, no matter how
Mhm.
good you are. That's what those people were saying that you quoted is, we see them as amazing players, but that's because they only play the stuff that they know how to play well
Yeah.
in front of people. You know, like for instance, I'm not much of a finger style player. That sort of arpeggio thing where you're using all your fingers on the right hand on the strings.
Mhm.
Now, Mr. Novoselic, um, my friend who used to play bass for Nirvana, is one of his big inspirations is a guy named John Fahey, and he's become extremely good at finger style acoustic guitar, like very good. Like he scares me because I can't do it at all. Um, we made a record called Butterfly Launches from Spar Pole, and it's Chris on acoustic guitar and his friend Robert Michael Pyle, who we know as Bob, who is a poet, and he's a lepidopterist. He's a butterfly scientist, and he's got a whole series of kind of, I'd call them nature books. He writes about the natural world in a really engaging way, and he
Mhm.
writes poetry. And they got together, and we put some of, Bob would do his poetry on top of Chris's playing, and we made a really interesting record that I think sort of just slipped out and fell between the cracks last year because it was right before the lockdowns happened
Mhm.
as this record came out. A lot of people didn't hear it. So there's an example of like, you know, he's learned how to do that in the last 20 years and he's really good at it now. I
Mhm.
can't do it at all. You know, our guitar skills don't even intersect. So,
Mhm.
I could learn how to do that, but I think I'm quite a few years behind him. My wife is a much better player at that particular style than I am. So, everybody's good at something. Nobody's good at everything.